The incomparable, or incomparable, depending on what kind of emphasis you want to put on the word, is a legendary tier British battle cruiser, or battleship. The game considers it a battleship that was just added to the game in the December 2025 update. Unfortunately, the only way to obtain it is sorta prohibitive. Well, not sort of, that's a bit of an understatement. We'll get into that in a little bit, but I've got maybe 1.25 games to show you, this being the first one, where we're going to use the incomparable to get into some close quarters combat. Now, the survivability on this thing, as far as close quarters combat goes, is somewhat questionable, and I'll explain why later, but on the other hand, it's got all the tools it needs to win engagements at close quarters, including torpedoes, which are enough to dev strike the Des Moines there. And of course, we've also got the sonar active. It's not exactly the most fantastic ship detecting sonar out there. It only has a ship acquisition range of 3.5 kilometers, so mostly like the British sonar that you find on most British ships, it's just for detecting torpedoes and avoiding them, something that comes in handy during close quarters combat. The Z-44 unfortunately beaches himself against the island there. Not great. We're mostly able to avoid his torpedoes thanks to the sonar. And even though we're shooting AP at him, you can see the damage from it is pretty devastating because these are, at least at this point in time, as of December 2025, the largest guns in World of Warships Legends. So even AP overpens can do some pretty devastating damage to destroyers. And now, I thought we were safe from his torpedoes, but just as we take him out for the third kill of this rather abbreviated battle, he does launch the torpedoes, but this being a British battleship, it has built-in good acceleration, and it's enough to save us from the torpedoes. But now, with this final sequence, we are going to go down. This should be a pretty good demonstration of the sort of drawbacks that you would get if you try to take this thing into close quarters combat. Again, we'll go into detail more during the next battle. But the armor scheme is questionable, the HP pool is pretty low for a battleship, and then the torpedo damage reduction is almost non-existent. And as you can see, if you're fighting other enemy incomparables, which, there's an invasion of them right now, even though they are locked inside of loot boxes, a lot of people seem to have obtained it, like this guy, who, for some reason, has totally tarnished the aesthetics of the incomparable by putting on that rather hideous camo. It's kind of sad, but as you can see, we're taking a lot of damage as we push into these guys. We can overmatch their bows along with pretty much every other bow at the tier with our massive guns, but, they can do the same to us. Although we do have fairly robust armor aside from the bow in order to protect ourselves, but the torpedo damage reduction, as I've already alluded to, is practically non-existent, so those CV torpedoes doing 8,000 damage to us really hurt, and, well, we go down. So, it can perform in close quarters combat, but that is maybe not the optimal way to play it this early on in a match when you're pushing into so many superior numbers. So what I have here for you is a second battle that I think demonstrates a more optimal way to play the ship, which is, a little bit further away, on a flank, being stealthy, etc. However, before we really get into the specs of the ship, I should tell you how you obtain it and also show you my commander build. I've got John Fisher at the helm. He is basically designed for the British battle cruisers, and with this being a British battle cruiser, I think he's probably the optimal choice. As you can see, though, for the inspirations, I've opted for double concealment. Kondo and Swirsky, both of whom are at least at rank 16. Kondo is at rank 16 Legendary 4. Swirsky might be Legendary level 2 or 3, not sure, but with both of them together and the concealment mod, we have an incredible, absurd detect of 10.8 kilometers. And I feel like the ship kind of needs that just because of the survivability aspects, but at the same time, it's also ridiculous because it's going to allow you to outspot some cruisers. Just ask the Henri IV right there how he feels about being outspotted by a battleship with the largest guns in the game. Luckily for him, RNG is a thing. and we get 2 overpens instead of anything else. In fact, we're going to take another salvo at this Henri and get basically the same results. He's going to get lucky early on in this game, but we'll meet him a little bit later. Now, as for how you obtain the ship, that is perhaps the most unfortunate part about the Incomparable. It is only obtainable through boxes. There are 2 boxes that you can buy for doubloons this holiday season, those being the Mystic Box and the Mystic Lantern. The Mystic Lantern has higher drop rates than the Mystic Box, but both of them have a chance of dropping the Mystic Chests. Doesn't seem to me like you can just straight up buy the Mystic Chests. You have to get lucky and have them get dropped out of either the Mystic Box or the Mystic Lantern. And then once you get a Mystic Chest, it has the chance to drop the Incomparable, the Aki, and the Marceau. So it's luck of the draw. It's pretty prohibitive as far as obtaining it, which that's probably not a great thing. It's not great when they lock ships behind loot boxes like that and you sort of have to take your chances. But at the same time, this ship is so absurd that I don't know that widespread proliferation throughout the game and the tier is a great thing. But still, I'd prefer you'd be able to buy the ship outright. Maybe someday in the future you can, but as of now, the only way you're going to get it is by spending some money and getting a little bit of luck, which, you know, some people out there have gotten that luck, like that Incomparable going behind the island. Anyway, on to the specs of the ship, which are, of course, influenced by the commander build. I'll try to point out where, but we'll start with the survivability. We've got 67,200 HP with this build. Now base, it's higher, 70,000 even. The reason it's lower than that is because on Fisher, in his 3rd row of skills, he's got a skill called Reformer that we're using. It buffs main battery range on the battleship by 6%, buffs torpedo range by 6%, buffs dispersion by 7%, but the trade-off is a 4% nerf to the HP. So that's why that is. But either way, 67,000, 70,000, probably the lowest HP pool for any battleship at Legendary Tier. Not 100% sure on that, but I think it's the case. So it's got that going against it. And then the armor is fairly decent, I would say. The Citadel is exposed. It does sit above the waterline, and it goes from the front turret to the back turret. So if you're broadside, this is probably one of the most dev-strikeable battleships in the entire game. And both the bow and the stern plating is an overmatchable 25 millimeters. So practically every battleship you meet can go right through the bow. However, it does have some side plating on the bow that extends from the midsection of the ship about halfway across the lower waterline portion of the bow. So if you're angled like this, imagine there is an enemy ship right where I'm aiming, and they shoot at your bow and hit that angled side plating, they can bounce their shells rather than overmatching. It's like half an icebreaker, but if you're bow on, you will be overmatched. Now, the belt armor is quite good. The deck armor is 51 millimeters, and the armor belt is 102. That is enough to bounce battleship caliber guns from any battleship you're going to encounter, including the Incomparable itself. So it does have all that going for it, but again, this ship is a very long and flat ship. So I think there are going to be some cases where even if you're angled, you might still get penned, and the damage, you know, it's not going to feel great. This is not the most heavily armored ship in the world. I think you have to play it passively from time to time. But as I showed you in that first sequence, it does have the tools that it needs to get into close quarters combat like we're about to do with this enemy Incomparable, where we can overmatch his bow if we don't completely miss and get an overpen. But of course, we've also got torpedoes on the Incomparable. We've got 1 torpedo launcher on either side of the ship, and they are quadruple torpedo launchers, so they launch 4, and of course, being British, you can single fire them like we've done here. They have a range of 10.6 kilometers, they go at 62 knots, reload time of 96 seconds, and they hit for a maximum of 15,753, so they've got a lot of potency to them. And then, of course, the main battery guns, which we've alluded to a little bit. They are the largest guns in the game, 6 of them, 508 millimeters with a power to overmatch 35 millimeter plating, which I'm not totally convinced that being able to overmatch 35 is significantly better than being able to overmatch 32, just because I can't think of a lot of 35 millimeter plating anywhere in the game. If it's not 30 or 32, then the next value would be like 38, which you find on the deck and upper belt armor of the American battleships, for example. 35 is just not a number that I think you see all that often, so I don't know that being able to overmatch it is much better than 32, but the thing is capable of it. And these guns with this build have a range of 20.1 kilometers. They have a very quick reload time of 26 seconds, and our turret traverse is 35.3 seconds, which is serviceable. Actually, pretty good, to be honest with you. And then the accuracy. It's got a sigma value of 2.1, and it appears to just have regular battleship dispersion. So the guns are accurate. I wouldn't call them laser pinpoint accurate. Sometimes they'll let you down and troll you, but they're accurate enough to get the job done. And with that quick reload, there's a lot of chances to redo a salvo if the first one misses, I suppose you could say. As for how much damage they do, well, as you can imagine, being the largest guns in the game, they also have the largest single-shell AP alpha in the game at a ridiculous 19,500. Previously, the record holders for the highest AP alpha were my beloved Georgia and Ohio at, I think, 15,750. This is higher than that, and we're not even using any commander skills to buff the damage that they do. There's plenty of commander skills out there. You can easily get these shells hitting at over 20,000 a citadel, which is ridiculous. And, well, no improved pen angles. You wouldn't really expect it to have improved pen angles with the kind of power that guns this size offer on the AP. And the HE, for what it's worth, although I don't know that there are too many cases where you would ever use the HE, but the HE is suitably British. It's got an alpha of 7,400, which is ridiculously high, and it's got a very British fire chance of 55%, which is likewise absurd. However, with guns this large and with AP this potent, I don't know that you'll ever be shooting the HE too often. As for the AA defense, I don't really think it has any, so take that for whatever it's worth. No ship really has that great AA defense, in my opinion. Maneuverability, though, it's fast. We've got a 34.2 knot speed. That might be because we're running the speed flag. I think base, it's a little bit lower than that, but we're at 34.2. And then we've got the engine boost, which gives us an 8% buff, so we can get up probably close to 40 knots in a straight line. I'm not exactly sure, but the rudder shift, I'll tell you, that is ridiculous. It's 12 seconds with the rudder shift mod, which we've taken on our build because the British don't get the propulsion mod. Base is only 16 seconds, though. That's incredibly quick for a battleship. However, the turning circle is terrible. 1,160, which if that is not the largest turning circle radius in the game, it's at least in the top 3. You have to be pretty good at maneuvering battleships to maneuver this thing well. But then the concealment, one of the major highlights of the ship. With the concealment module and the high-level Kondo and Swirsky, I think I've already said this, but it's 10.8, probably the stealthiest battleship in the entire game. So this is something that you drive around like a battle cruiser. It's fast, it's great on a flank, it overmatches like everything, the guns hit crazy hard, and it's just a really unique, really kind of goofy ship. It's very enjoyable to play in my experience. I like it a lot. However, this battle is going to be an incomparable tragedy. I don't know if we even won that first battle I showed you, but if you've been paying attention to the minimap while I've been talking, you'll have noticed that the blue team all congregated in the center of the map for a Warships Anonymous meeting, and most of them have been sent back to port. The red team is spread out, and you can see the results. They're far ahead of us on points, but what we have in the back of the map on the 1-2 line are 2 conquerors who, for some reason, have kited back there. And so we thought, well, if we go to the center of the map where all the cruisers are, maybe if we can sink them, that will be enough to turn the tide of the battle. And it probably would be if all of our friendly ships survived. But unfortunately, they're not going to do that because the other surviving battleship, for some reason, has decided that it's a good idea to push straight into two conquerors who can melt him easily on the way in, not to mention the Henri, who I'm sure is shooting at him too. So he's not long for this world, and neither are our two cruiser teammates. But the Henri has got his ticket punched after all the overpens we did to him earlier on. He goes down for our third kill, and we are on a Kraken alert between this Stalingrad and this Takahashi, who looks like he's maybe going to take out the blue cruiser inside of this cap with us. He's going to go down now to the predations of the Takahashi. Well, maybe not quite now, but in a second here. And I don't know what happens to the other cruiser behind us, but he's going to go down momentarily too. And then we are going to be the last hope against 4 ships. I think if these guys had all survived and we had the same results between sinking the Dalian, the Henri, and then provided we got kills on this Takahashi and Stalingrad, that might have been enough to get us ahead on points and win us the battle. But as it stands, the only way we're going to win is if we sink literally all of the remaining enemy ships, and we're not going to be able to do that. But maybe we can get a Kraken for our consolation prize. There's Takahashi beached against those rocks there. Not ideal. We'll take careful aim, and hopefully, if the accuracy cooperates, he'll go back to port. He does. And that just leaves Stalingrad, whose bow we can, of course, overmatch, and who has almost no HP to speak of. About 1 bar, so approximately 5,000 HP. One singular full penetration from these guns would be enough to take him out, but naturally, Stalingrad breaks one of our turrets, and we get an overpen for 1,950. Not enough to take out the Stalingrad, and so we end this battle with a tragic loss. However, I think it was an enjoyable battle to play, and one that shows off the strengths of this rather absurd and ridiculous battle cruiser. 2,189 base XP on a loss with 4 kills. That should be a good indication that this is a pretty potent ship. The only thing that's bad about it is the method for obtaining, which relies on you getting lucky with some crates. Maybe it'll come back to the game in the future in some other more easily obtainable method, but as it stands, it's probably unlikely that you'll get the ship. But if you get lucky enough to get it, and you're willing to take a chance on those loot boxes, well, it's a really fun ship to play. There's nothing else in the game quite like it, and it is quite potent. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.